Thanks everybody for joining us on a Friday morning. It's good to have everyone here. Looking forward to going through today. I want to start with the idea of why we're listening. What is the point of this whole listening strategy? So to start with, and I'll go to the next slide here, why is asking important? Why is listening important? Obviously, for most of us, we are fortunate enough that it's one of our 5 senses that we have and really helps us to live our lives. So listening has a big part of our structure as human beings. It's how we're able to communicate and process complex information. And this is what really separates us from any other living creature out there. And we see the same kind of thing happening in business every day. And that's what we're going to talk about. But first, to start off with, we're going to talk about a little history lesson of the learning strategy and maybe talk about some companies or processes that have done it well and maybe some who haven't. So in this example, we're going to go back in history a little bit and we're going to look at the car manufacturing days. And everybody that remembers the Ford plant and how they created the assembly line and what a big deal that was. And in terms of the assembly line back then, we would have employees sit at a certain spot and they would do a certain task over and over and over again over the course of weeks, months, and years. And as they continue to do their task, that assembly line would continue to move the process down the line to the next person. In this world, every one of these assembly lines had a supervisor. And that supervisor is really important in terms of managing work and process flow and QA. So in this example, with the assembly line, because of the way it was created, Ford was able to produce massive amount of cars in fractions of the time. Now the problem with that though is if that assembly line ever stops moving, well, that's time and money. So the assembly line very rarely stopped. And the only person that could really stop it was that supervisor, right? Because the supervisor is the leader, they're the manager, they're the boss, they know best. Well, maybe not. So as we transition now to the idea of what across the pond they were doing at Toyota as they were building their automobiles, they had a different process. What they would do instead was understand that every single employee that was doing that work was the expert of that work. You are doing that same task every minute, week, month, day, and year. You know it better than us. So instead of the supervisor being seen as this Herculean expert, which is the only person with the keys to the car, metaphorically, instead, Toyota did something different. The supervisor here changed to being a person that would manage workflow in a different way. In this case, if there's a problem on the line, we really expect the employees who are doing that work every day to be empowered and enabled to understand opportunities for improvement or defects. So in this case, if somebody had a problem on the Toyota line, they had the ability and the enablement to pull the line to a stop by themselves. And then you would see your team leader then start to go and diagnose and understand what's the opportunity. So these graphs on the right really start to show how Toyota started to create a manufacturing feedback loop. Instead of this very hierarchical one-size-fits-all of Henry Ford, Toyota understood that if we empower people, the people closest to the work, to really control and own that work, and we create a good feedback loop, not only do we improve our processes, but we start to learn as an organization. Listening is what helps us perform that. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So today where we are is we obviously have been listening. We've taken those feedback and we talked to the group boots on ground, so to speak. And usually how we see this is in the form of an annual engagement survey. The problem is that same feedback loop and that same listening strategy hasn't really changed methodologies for the last 50 years. It's the same kind of questions that we answered 10 years ago, and it's the same questions that our parents before us answered. And it's time to evolve that process because today's workforce has engagement exhaustion. I already answered those questions and I'm not seeing anything happen about it. It doesn't seem very actionable. So today, what we're going to talk about is actually how to measure employee effectiveness, which is much more than engagement. And engagement is an outcome, not the strategy. So the first thing I'd like everyone to think about as you're thinking about building an analytics platform or a feedback loop or listening strategy is make sure that the information you're capturing is also behavioral based. Every survey that we know out there is all about thoughts and feelings and attitudes and opinions. And as Michelle said, my background's in psychology. I very much believe in those things. But mom used to tell us that sometimes actions speak louder than words. And if we're only measuring what people are saying, but we're not comparing that with what they're doing, at best we're capturing half the picture. So instead, by combining behavioral and attitudinal data, we're able to get much deeper into the ideas of opportunities that are out there for us. The next one that we're going to talk about is the idea of crowdsourced. So traditionally, when we think about implementing a new policy or plan, we always start with the focus group, the visioning session, the strategy session, whatever you call it. Now, the problem with that is that's usually a little bit premature. If we are asking leaders to understand what our people need to do their job, chances are the solution's only going to work for people like them. What do I mean? Well, those focus groups are usually fairly non-representative, right? In this case, leaders are usually ones in those focus groups, and leaders are obviously paid more. They certainly have better benefits. They're usually more tenured in the organization. And for all of those reasons, they probably don't look like the other 95% of the population. So instead of understanding what they need and extrapolating that data, instead, we want to crowdsource that information and start our conversations and start our visioning sessions in a different place. Instead of making those leaders be representative samples, instead, we're going to bring a representative sample to them. Here's how your organizational DNA works. Based on this information, where should we go? With better information, leaders make better decisions. And that's why the idea of crowdsourcing is going to be so important for your analytics practice as you move forward. The next one we're going to talk about is the idea of predictive. So it's great that you did your study. It's great that your analytics are where they are today. It's great that you did your engagement survey or whatever have you. But tomorrow's going to be completely different. And by the way, in the next couple of hours, will probably be very different. We know that we're living in an increasingly fast-moving world, the VUCA world that it is. And if you're creating a policy, or you're building a new space, or you're making a large decision, chances are it'll take anywhere from a few weeks to a few months to a few years to fully realize the implementation process. And in that time, your workforce has completely changed. Listen, we know we're on the age curve. We know that 40% of our baby boomers are going to retire the next 5 years, and they're going to be replaced by millennials and Gen Zers. And they work very, very differently. We know that most organizations are starting to really grow their headcount in terms of IT skill sets. And by the way, IT-related folks work very differently than the maybe sales department or the HR department does. And for all of these reasons, we want to understand where will you be in the future. Today is great, but tomorrow is even more valuable. So as we start to think about predictive future planning, now we want to start to think about how is my demographics going to change? Where will the workforce go? And if I can understand that and provide some predictive analytics, now I can even take the most risk-averse leaders and make them feel better about the investments they're going to make. Because now it's not shooting darts in the dark anymore. Now we're moving train. And that's what predictive does for you. The next one we're going to talk about is safety or psychological safety. This is the idea of stopping the line in that Toyota example. So to start off the idea on this one, if I were to ask any of our participants today, on a scale of 1 to 5, how much do you like your boss? One of your questions would be, well, it depends. Is my boss going to see the answers? And if I told you yes, chances are you're going to inflate your scores, right? 5, best boss I ever had. Now that might not be true, but it keeps you out of trouble. And that's what psychological safety is all about. Because if you're marking 5 because you're afraid of how that information is going to be used, well, now we have bad data. Junk in, junk out is the old saying, right? And at best, what that means is you wasted a lot of time and money, energy, and resources doing a study that doesn't matter. But at worst, you're actually taking action on data that's pointing you in the wrong direction. So it's really important as we start to think about creating measures, whether you're in workplace and you want to do seat sensors, or whether you're in HR and you're asking about how much you like your boss. Psychological safety is drastically missing in today's survey and feedback loop system. And for that reason, we're dealing with a lot of dirty data. Instead, really fight and make sure that your feedback loops create an air of psychological safety so we have the clean, real information that'll point us in the right direction. The last one we're going to talk about, when you think about where do I go with my analytics and how do I start to implement new things, it's really important to think about synergetic solutions. And what I mean by that is measuring the holistic employee experience. Too often times in these organizations, what we see is that we have organizational silos. That's nothing new for anybody listening, I'm sure, but oftentimes HR will run away and do a leadership survey or an engagement survey. Simultaneously, your corporate real estate department is doing a survey and study on real estate and how it affects people. And IT is running a technology study and understanding how does technology really going to enable performance. And in a silo, all three of them are touching different parts of the working experience, but none of them are synergetic. They don't speak to each other. They use different metrics in a different language. Look to find solutions that really a holistic employee experience in one spot. And that'll do two things for you. One, it'll get all of your different departments who are all playing instruments on the same sheet of music, so it sounds like an actual song. And number two, it's really going to help us as an organization, holistically from a high level, look at aligning our resources with where it matters most. Maybe we're doing really good in this part of the experience, but we really have the opportunity to move mountains here. That is the idea of really being efficient and effective with our resources as we start to think about building analytics solutions for the future employees. So now I'm going to go back to that loop system that we looked at with Toyota. What Toyota did by having this frontline management conversation and creating this feedback loop is they started to learn as an organization. If an employee needed to stop the line, the manager now goes from being a kind of a dictator to being a helpful resource, understanding and diagnosing the problem. Once we diagnose, we'll create an improvement. We'll see and measure it on the back end, and we'll start to measure that and create, again, this iterative loop. Now our processes get better. We start to be a little bit more assured with the products we're putting out. And as a company and as a group of employees, we're starting to learn and trust each other more. This is the idea of the feedback loop. So now we're going to take that idea and move it forward to what we call the OODA loop. Now the OODA loop, we got from the military. I come from an Air Force family, and as son of a pilot, this was the big deal as a pilot. If you're in a dogfight, and you can imagine, Top Gun and Maverick and all that jazz, they would always say that the person who won the fight isn't the person with the best plane or the most missiles or the best support or the best wingman, despite what Top Gun might say. Who wins that dogfight every time is the person who can go through the OODA loop the fastest. Now the OODA loop is something that goes on in your head, it goes on in your mind, and it stands for these four words in red you see. First, you need to observe your environment. What's going on around us? You need to orient yourself with that environment. Now that I took that information in, what does it mean? And I quickly need to make a decision based on that information and take action. And I need to make sure, like a loop, it's iterative, so that the first person who is in an airplane that can see the other guy, know the speed, understand the angles, can quickly make a decision and act, and then complete that process over and over again, that's the guy that goes home and wins the fight. Similarly, as we think about analytics, we want to make sure that all of our partners and anybody we're talking to today really thinks about the process not as a once of the year check of the box situation like most engagement surveys are, but instead, how do we build a feedback loop, an iterative process, the 80-20 rule that kind of constantly is making sure that we're getting better, smarter, faster, and stronger. And that's the idea behind the OODA loop in terms of analytics. Now, these are some of the things that we measure, and you certainly don't, but I want to give you some ideas on kinds of things that you can measure and really tie together to measure that holistic employee experience. The first one in the top left corner is behaviors. What are people doing? Where are they spending their time? How long does it take? How hard is it? How collaborative is it? And most importantly, of all these things that we're doing in our given day, how important is that time spent when determining value and trying to meet goals? Again, productivity is all about time and value, and that's something that's going to be really helpful to measure. The next is we measure, and we'd encourage you to do the same, a network analysis. How are people connecting in the organization? How is information flowing? What are the key dependencies? Who relies on who to get the job done? These information will really help us understand ideas of codependencies and co-locations. It'll also help us start to figure out the idea of legacy waste. Oftentimes, departments are sending big 20-page packets back and forth, and it looks like a lot of good information. But in reality, if no one's reading it and it's not helping anybody, man, maybe we can save some time and save a few FTEs a year and do something different. Change that conversation, change that medium, change that metrics that are being shared. Either way, again, what we want to understand is how information is flowing and how valuable is it? And if it's not, let's give some time back to our employees to do what really matters. Third one is culture. Everybody's talking about culture today, right? Culture eats strategy for breakfast. I hear it every week. However, I don't see anybody ever measuring it. You can't manage what you don't measure, and culture does eat strategy for breakfast. You can have the best solution, the best work from home policy, or whatever you might do, but if it doesn't fit the culture, it's not going to fly. So how do you make it fit the culture? It starts with understanding it. Where are we today? Where do we want to go in the future? And how do I build a solution that really reinforces who we are as a company and as an organization and as a team? Mobility is all the rage nowadays, whether you're in workspace and you're trying to figure out a flexible working solution, or whether you're in HR and you're starting to think about teleworking and flexible working policies. As today's generation continues to move and new employees that continue to evolve what matters most to them, flexibility is becoming a big one, and we want to understand that. When we think about environment, this is kind of your traditional items, the things that you care about most when you show up on a given day. The difference is we want to understand what matters most. Traditionally, as we look at engagement surveys, it's really hard to tell where do we start to take action. Is it the item with the lowest overall satisfaction? Or maybe it's the item with the highest amount of dissatisfaction, right? Because those are the pain points. Or it's the item that's furthest away from the benchmark that we all care about. Long story short, it ends up coming biased based on the analytics person who's reading it, and that's not good. Instead, when you think about measuring your employee satisfaction, have some kind of idea about trade-offs. What matters most? On a scale of 1 to 5, you might not like this, but does it matter? And if not, I want to understand where is this signal, and I want to stop following the noise. As an organization, this really helps us align our resources with where it matters most. You can't be all to everybody, so do what you do best. And lastly, when we think about workplace, how do we start to take space and really tailor it to the organization instead of following trends? Listen, you're not the same guy down the street, and you don't want to be. If you were, your talent's going to get swapped all day long. Instead, let me build a solution not only that matches my unique working behaviors, but can actually reinforce a better use of employee time. This again makes people healthier and happier, which increases your bottom line as an organization. So the last thing I want to talk about quickly is kind of where we go from today. Obviously, love having the opportunity to speak to you. Michelle, again, thank you so much for the opportunity. And for anyone out there, if you ever want to continue the dialogue or ask some questions, or if there's any other data nerds out there maybe, I'd love to have some further dialogue and talk about what you're seeing in the field, what we're seeing, and potentially work together.